To you from my autobiography entitled, I Count My Life by Sabbaths. Section 3, My Youth. Chapter 1, Moving to Greenwood. About the time of my 10th year, big changes began to take place in the Schmidt household. My dad had gone from selling Fuller brushes in Johnson County to selling salad masters. The approach was to get your foot in the door by offering to prepare a meal for the client. Once that was scheduled, Dad would demonstrate all the uses of this device. It must have been a very good product because it is still around in some form. At our home, we had lots of salads as my dad honed his skills, and also because he was kind of a health nut. From Salad Master, Dad began selling dictaphone and then APECO office equipment. APECO stands for American Photocopy Equipment Company. You can Google it, and there are antiques still around. My father, being a great salesman, broke all records in his territory for selling these devices. They were supposed to sell 6 of these machines a month, but Dad would often double that and was therefore paid handsome bonuses. APECO was a wet copy system in which there were chemicals that were not supposed to stain cloth, and it also used a treated paper. Xerox pretty well put APECO out of business, but during its run, Dad actually sold the machine to Mr. Lilly of Eli Lilly and Company. During the demonstration, Dad accidentally got some of the copy solution on Mr. Lilly's suit pants. Dad told him that it wouldn't stain his pants, though Dad did freak out. And the good news was that it didn't stain the pants, and Mr. Lilly bought 3 machines for his offices. Dad photographed and kept a copy of Mr. Lilly's personal check. Dad's boss, Mr. Bentley, was amazed at Dad's productivity and wanted Dad to be a full-time salesman. He knew Dad was a pastor, and his thinking was, if Bill can sell so many machines as a part-time salesman, what could he do if he was totally immersed in the company? Eventually, he gave my father an ultimatum, forcing Dad to choose between his career in sales and his career as a pastor. To Mr. Bentley's shock and disappointment, Dad chose the ministry. I will never forget the day Dad came home and announced to Mom and all of us that he was in the full-time ministry. Those fat bonus checks were gone, and we now lived on about $50 a week from the church. I've seen copies of Dad's weekly checks from APECO in those early 60s. They often ran between $1,000 to $1,500. That was a lot of money in those days. In its day, APECO was a glamour stock that soared, and split again. My father was late getting in on the stock, and by the time it had reached its height, it was too late. Dad did buy stock, but took a bath when the bottom fell out. He was never good in the stock market, always losing more than he earned, and I take after him in that regard. Chapter 2, Mr. Tom Bentley. Dad's boss, Mr. Bentley, played a significant role in our lives. He was a man of medium height, tanned, honey blonde hair, and he wore that slick back. He was always in a tailored suit, and his shoes were always shined. He wasn't a dandy, but he was a professional who always represented his job well as an APECO executive over Indiana. Every year, APECO participated in a trade show in Indianapolis, and I always loved to go because every vendor gave something away. On one occasion, Dad took all 3 of us kids with him, and we went from vendor to vendor, filling our bags with these treasures. My sister, Ethel, was very enterprising. We got a call from some of our neighbors asking if we knew what Ethel was doing. It turned out Ethel was going door to door in our neighborhood trying to sell these trinkets for $0.10 apiece. I don't know how much money Ethel made, but it was something my parents found hilarious. For years, we always teased Ethel about this. Mr. Bentley lived in a high-rent district in northern Meridian Street, Indianapolis. Occasionally, he needed a common laborer to do his chores around the house. Once this need coincided with a strike that was going on at General Motors, and my Sunday school teacher, Mr. Bill Cruz, was laid off. Dad asked him if he wanted to do some work for Mr. Bentley, and he was happy to. After a morning of doing some of the work for Mr. Bentley, he was invited by Mrs. Bentley to come into the house for a little lunch she had prepared for him. When he sat down, he was mystified by the place setting. He asked what the rag, cloth napkin, was for, and he didn't know what a fork was for. My father was appalled because we were not aware of how backward the Cruzes were. Chapter 3. School, Isom Elementary. Before all this happened, however, Mom and Dad purchased a house on 201 Pleasant Lane in Greenwood. It's across the street from what is presently the Greenwood Middle School, or more recently, the Greenwood Police Department. In those days, this building housed both the middle school and the high school. What this meant for my sisters and I was that we were withdrawn from Calvary Christian School and placed in the Greenwood Public Schools. It was quite a culture shock. My fifth grade teacher in the old Isom Elementary building was Mrs. Alice Wood. She was a serious woman with very little humor. She was competent, yet colorless. I walked back and forth between our home and school every day. I was big enough now to walk a distance of about a half a mile. The trip took me past Kelly Chevrolet, the Mocklet house with its wrought iron fence and mysterious brick enclosure. It had been reported that wild animals like lions and bears had once roamed these grounds. My walk led me past a place where we used to hold street meetings and Yeoman's Drugstore. It wasn't long before, after school, I was ordering cowboy cocktails at this fountain for a dime and buying penny candy in the dime store owned and operated by Mr. Ralph Broman. In later years, when I was a young pastor, Mr. Broman would come to the church and sit for an hour or two in the quiet of our prayer room. There was the United Presbyterian Church and Bob Shirley's garage, where we could patch our tires on our bicycles for free. Since our church was considered to be a part of the UPC, that is, the United Pentecostal Church, I was delighted by the shock that registered on my father's face when I came home and announced there was another UPC church in town, United Presbyterian Church. I would cut through parking lots past the Methodist Church to the block on which the 3-story plus basement old Isom Elementary was. Dr. Porter, Stanley Porter, was the Greenwood School superintendent, and he was a kindly man who seemed to mix with anybody and everyone. For years after he retired, he could be seen riding his bike all over the community. Both sisters and I attended Isom Elementary. The school was named after Mr. V. O. Isom, who was its principal for an entire generation. There was a large grassy area where we held recess, and next to it was a very large, mysterious building that may have been used to generate steam. It had a very tall chimney that was part of a high school building that had burned down to the ground during World War II. At one time, this old school building housed all the grades in Greenwood. Arvin's Industries, which made car exhaust pipes, was on the other side of the fence. It was during these crosstown walks that I learned to cuss. The flow of walking traffic led me against a flow of upperclassmen going to middle and high school. Big kids always seemed to enjoy bullying and picking on smaller, younger children. And while my parents never knew anything about this, I put up with a lot of discomfort and humiliating situations. For example, they would chase me, seemed to take pleasure in name-calling, throwing snowballs, teasing, and I soon learned that cussing alleviated this problem. When I was threatened, I would start cussing as loud as I could, saying the most awful things, some of which I didn't even know the meanings of. Rather than get mad and pursue me, this seemed to amuse the older kids. They seemed to enjoy provoking this little kid into cussing up a storm. The only thing I had to watch for was not letting this slip at home. Fortunately for me, I never slipped, but my sister Beth did. When she said the word damn in front of Mom, she got into real trouble. Mom spanked her and washed her mouth out with soap. You can get my autobiography, I Count My Life by Sabbath, on Amazon, and also in Kindle and Nook form.